Sandy and Nora's podcast.
Hey, Nora.
Hey, Sandy.
How's it going? Did anything terrible happen in your town this week?
I mean, you know what? I saw something like 324 people wearing cowboy hats tonight, women, and all but 2 were wearing the exact same thing. One person was wearing a dress that was different. Another person was wearing a baggy T-shirt that was different. But everybody else was wearing the exact same thing. That was really weird. So I would put that down as bad. Not enough creativity.
Yeah, I mean, that is terrible. Very, very strange. I'm curious about the cults in Quebec City at this point because of that. But I want you to know that it's probably Olivia Chow's fault.
Oh, I don't know. Country music? Is that Olivia Chow's fault? Maybe.
I guess so. I don't know. If the news back home, and not the news, I don't mean like the news. I'm talking about like the Twitter news. There's been some, very awful events that have happened in Toronto. And there's like this chorus of people online who've clearly been readied to campaign against Olivia Chow no matter what, who are just like, this is Olivia Chow's Toronto.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, already.
Which, of course, she's been elected as the new mayor, but she doesn't start till this week. But anyway, a bunch of people, including former candidates like Anthony Furey, are really, really insistent that these things are a result of Olivia Chow's Toronto and not John Tory's Toronto, because, I mean, this is still his Toronto. And I don't know. I just, yeah, people suck, man.
People do suck. But you know what doesn't suck, Sandy?
Us?
Yeah, us and Summer and talking politics and trying to change the way that you and I, we collectively talk about things. Because I think the one thing that has been very, very clear to me in the last couple of weeks, specifically, and we'll talk about this tonight, but not specifically about this, but the way that we create spaces to have discussions and refine our ideas and refine our arguments is so critical. And when you don't have that, you end up with a weird situation like we have right now, where the peace movement in this country, the anti-war movement in this country, nascent, trying to get its stuff together, is just shut down, hit down, slapped around, told to go to hell, called genocide deniers, called warmongers every step of the way. And that's why we need to create these kinds of spaces so that we can sharpen our arguments, create community, and feel confidence in the arguments that we are drawn to, that we develop and think are great. So I think that's great. Yeah,
I've been sort of watching some of the responses to you lately online in particular, and some other folks online, and how any sort of like anti-war stance that is critical of like the players in what's happening in Ukraine gets like, people are being called Putin apologists and so on, and it's kind of bizarre to watch, because I feel like we've done like a really quick loop at the beginning of this, when Russia, the most recent invasion, there was like this strange sort of what felt like a hurrah for war by a lot of people who identify themselves as being against Putin. But the way of expressing that was like this sort of hurrah for war. And then about a year goes by, and it seemed like people were becoming more sober on it and starting to understand that perhaps there's an anti-war position that can be taken that is a little bit more critical. And now, I don't know, I'm starting to see like the evidence of like a really concerted efforts to campaign to get us back to that place online. And yeah, I mean, it doesn't do anybody good. And so, as you said, what's good? Talking politics? I don't know, not all the time. Sometimes talking politics suck. But it's definitely good to have places where you can have some critical discussion. That's for sure.
Totally. And you know what? We've got some gratitude too.
Hey, I love that. Let's give out some gratitude.
Yes. So thank you to everybody who liked and shared the podcast this past weekend, who engaged with the podcast at all. Especially thank you to Mac, Jean-Paul, and Emily. You guys are awesome. We love you. And also, Ben, great suggestion for us to reignite the Discord server. We have a Discord. I have to figure out how to like mass invite people to it because, you know, the links change, but I'm going to do what I can. Let's try to get the Discord server coming back because I don't know if you've seen it, Sandy, but social media this past week has been kind of like, feels like it's like on the rocks.
Well, I mean, there's Threads. Threads has popped up. There's a Twitter killer called Threads that's out there.
Isn't that like a clothing designer or something?
I don't know. I definitely got one though. I almost got Sandy and Nora one, and then I saw your tweet that was just like, I'm not giving more of myself to Zuckerberg, and I was like, oh, okay.
You could have given some of myself for me.
Sure. I mean, to me, they're all the same. So if we're doing one, we're doing them all. But I'm not threading on there in any greater way than I'm tweeting on Twitter. So I'm just there to lurk. But there it is. That happened on the social medias this week, and yeah, I mean, social media is definitely falling apart. Absolutely. I mean, yeah, we've been watching this happen for a while, have we not? Yeah.
Well, we also had this weird rate limited issue about a week ago on Twitter where it wasn't sure that we'd be allowed to tweet more than some number of tweets per day or even look at some number of tweets per day. That seems to have been ironed out. But yeah, it does seem like it's a lot less fun on Twitter. And I've been like very much wondering, like, did I change or am I the exact same person and the platform has changed? I remember back when like the best thing in the world is having like a to the jugular argument on Facebook. And that seems like so far in the past that it's like Facebook isn't that at all anymore. And now Twitter is like just the most syphilitic trolls always on my ass. And it's like, this isn't fun either. What the fuck?
Well, no, the platform has definitely changed. I mean, I know that I certainly did change, and that's part of how I stopped like interacting as much on Twitter, is because I started to think really deeply about what the interaction means, and then I couldn't square it with myself. But the platform has definitely changed. I mean, like I get now far more notifications about DMs than I ever have, and I mean, it's all Bitcoin and porn, it seems like. So I don't really understand what the heck is happening there. And anything that is remotely interesting that comes up that is like, oh gosh, like this seems like a really serious thing that I should know more about. If I click on it, guaranteed I have to scroll until, I get some sort of whatever the thumb equivalent of carpal tunnel is in my thumb in order to get to any sort of responses that are useful, because the first few responses are always going to be these people who have paid for a blue check so they can be first up. And those responses tend to be really, really ugly. And when there's so much that's happening in the world right now that is really impacting particularly marginalized communities, it's like, God, I don't want to fucking see that shit, actually. I don't want manosphere response to what's happening with respect to like anything. So, no.
Yeah, I've gone in the habit of scrolling like 4 solid fast scrolls through any replies just so I get past the blue checks. And what I find so fascinating is that like in a lot of the tweets that I think are really funny or really insightful, that they're not necessarily super political, it doesn't take very long to get past the blue checks, right? It's like there's average people are there pretty quickly and it's like, okay, I'm here for this content. But then you go to a story like the one that CTV News reported this past weekend, which is that in some part of Germany, for the first time since World War II, a far-right municipal council has become elected, or far-right mayor or something like this. So for the first time since the Nazis were in power, they're seeing a resurgence of the far right. And the replies were all blue checks. They were all fucking denying that this far-right thing is even close to Nazism, which was like, whoa, up is down. What the fuck is going on? And I tried to scroll past all this stuff to see how average people were engaging with this, and it took a long time. So it is very interesting to see what are the tweets that have like the hundreds and hundreds of blue check replies, and what are the tweets that have like maybe a dozen blue check replies, and how much Twitter has had to actively encourage the far right on this platform, because I think a lot of us have seen over the years that it's a place that if the general balance of the universe is operating correctly, it tends to be a more left-wing place, because it's just more average people being able to talk about their own average issues. So that's going to express left-wing politics more than right-wing politics. So that was a pretty interesting reminder, and it was pretty despairing to see how many people were like insisting that Nazism is actually socialism. Oh, including actually an old tweet from someone who had a makeover this past weekend. Apparently, Pierre Poilievre thinks that Nazism is socialism as well.
Was that Pierre Poilievre, or was it like some version of Superman, like this guy without glasses who's appeared on our screen? Who is that?
Yeah. Let's just say that he's fallen into a big bin of CrossFit and is now officially a CrossFit bro.
Wait, actually?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, but if you look at his arms, he's either doing steroids or he's on CrossFit or he's on CrossFit and steroids. But he's definitely going for something, and I know the exact kind of guy that he's going for. And I have to say that even though he looks like Milhouse even more, I think it's unfortunately effective.
Oh wait, you didn't allow that to live as long as it needed to. You say it again, give it a pause. You need to let that live. That was a good one. I liked it.
Well, it's one thing for him to look like Milhouse, as we all know Milhouse to look like, but if you go to any of the episodes where he takes off his glasses and his tiny little eyes blink, it's like, holy shit, okay, that is Pierre Poilievre. He's got tiny little eyes and big CrossFit mid 40-year-old guy trying to still look hot kind of arms.
Oh God, that's really. This is awful.
It's bad. It's awful.
Oh God, he looks so weird. Sorry, I just looked him up again as we were discussing. I can't. I'm sorry. I don't know what's going on here. It's something.
It's really bad. I mean, I'm trying to think of like what would be the equivalent. I guess back when Trudeau was doing his Three Musketeers look, like that was pretty hilarious. But he wasn't even the leader of the Liberal Party at that point. But for a leader of a party to go that far into the aesthetics to try and make his face look so different, and for someone who's literally only been a politician his entire existence, like his look has been something that he's been cultivating his entire life, it's pretty jarring. And he looks, and I think it's fine to talk about people's looks. I have to say, like I think talking about the way that someone's presenting themselves is really interesting from a political perspective, and I think he looks like shit. He looks really freaky, and I don't like looking at him.
Interesting. Well, I think that, I mean, maybe one of the, if I was to imagine myself as like a conservative strategist and trying to figure out why is this a priority? I mean, I think if they're looking into, competing against either Justin Trudeau or Chrystia Freeland or whomever it's going to be, and who's going to lead the Liberals in the next time around, that maybe what they're trying to do is present Pierre Poilievre as like the answer to Justin Trudeau, like in the way that around the world, Justin Trudeau got all of this press for being like Canada's hot, young, I can't even say it. It's just so gross.
It really is so gross.
Feminist, whatever. That he is like the answer to that in some way. Like in the same way that they did with Macron as well, like trying to capitalize on that. But I don't know. Milhouse, it's a look, I suppose, in the same way that Justin Trudeau's nothing face is a look, because I never understood that either.
Yeah. Now, I think what it does bear mentioning is that the Conservative Party knows that Poilievre is not popular. Like, he has not managed to break into any significant territories in Canada that are any different than he's already had. And so in polls, I mean, he's not pulling ahead in any significant way. And that's specifically true in Quebec, where Poilievre's brand of conservatism is not going to fly here. It has to be very different if you're going to attract voters en masse in this province, and the Bloc is still very, very strong. The Bloc is also led by this beefy guy who used to be the manager of a famous singer in this province. So, I don't know if the Conservative Party thinks that a makeover is going to be what does it for Poilievre, but it's the politics, folks. It's his actual fucking politics. And unless you figure out a way to moderate this completely extremist fucking freak, it's gonna be a failure. And I also just want to say, Sandy, I have a new prediction of who the next Liberal leader is going to be.
Ooh, do tell.
I think it's going to be Anita Anand.
Really?
Yeah, really. I mean, isn't it obvious? So here you have the woman who is leading Canada's war effort. She led Canada's pandemic effort when she was Minister of Procurement. She just had this big viral video because she met this BBC presenter whose name is also Anita Anand, and they were all like, "Oh my God, we have the same name." And I think that she has everything that the Liberals want. She's from the 905 in Toronto, which, I mean, that's as they would say, the vote rich 905 and the golden horseshoe for the Liberal Party of Canada. And she seems like actually capable, right? Which I don't know if we can say about Melanie Joly or even Freeland in terms of how she ever responds to anything. So that's my big guess. That's my big hypothesis, and you're welcome to have it too if you've been swayed by that little spiel.
No, I'm not. I still think it's Melanie Joly. If I'm guessing today, it's Melanie Joly.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. I saw, I mean, I didn't click on this news, but I did see that there was something announced this week about protections that Melanie Joly was announcing for Canadian mortgage holders as the interest rates go up. And to me, that's like, oh, okay, they really want to protect her as things might be getting tough for the average Liberal voter. So that I don't know. I'm still thinking Melanie Joly, but I hear your argument on Anand. It's interesting, and we shall see.
I love it. Sandy and Nora listeners, you know what? You take sides. You take sides, and as this evolves,
and I mean, you know what? Chrystia Freeland is still there as an option.
True. You gotta look carefully though, and down if she's not wearing her heels.
Oh my God.
Well, because she's super short, right? She's 4'1" or something.
Oh, geez.
No, I don't know. I just made that up.
I know that you made that up. The odd geez wasn't oh man, she's short. It was like Nora, here she goes. But what'll be interesting if it is Chrystia Freeland is what then happens with respect to Ukraine if Trump wins.
Right. Or the Republicans.
Or, I mean, well, it depends on which Republican, because I think there are some Republicans who are less interested in, being Putin's bestie than Trump.
True. And we can talk about this, but one piece of news that came out this past week is that NATO is feeling under pressure because they're afraid that the Republicans might win and it'll change everything. Not just if they're super close to Putin or not, but just that the Republicans have been a little bit cooler to the international empire expanding, certainly under Trump, but I kind of don't think any of his opponents would be all that different.
I don't know. Potentially, Pence might want to continue the same sort of wars help distract from things that are happening.
True.
Domestically, who knows? But also, Pence probably doesn't have a hope.
He's got a prayer.
But before we get there, can I just?
He's got a prayer.
He does. He probably has thoughts and prayers. If I could say one thing before we get on to this topic.
Yeah, of course.
The numbers that we spent on the submersible, that Canada spent on the submersible search, they've come out now. Do you know how much?
Yeah, ish. They haven't come out. This CTV has done a bit of an estimate, so we don't know the total amount, but this is definitely on the lower side of what it's going to be.
Okay, yes. This is the at least.
Yes.
This is the at least.
The floor. The ocean floor.
The floor is that it cost $2.4 million to deploy a single Canadian aircraft to search for the imploded submersible.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that's our CAF, right? So again, military funding, Anita Anand doing her duty. If we're not patrolling the Baltic, if we're not patrolling the Strait of Taiwan, we are sending sonobuoys into the ocean to look for an already exploded sub.
Yeah, it's really interesting how Canada can, at the drop of a hat, decide to do such a search for people who, these people have nothing to do with Canada, but we have the money and it's right there to be able to spend to do this sort of search. And I don't know, has Canada been asked to do searches similarly domestically that it's just dropped that sort of money on, Nora?
Well, certainly people were very, very quick to compare this to the lack of urgency coming from the federal government to search the Brady Road landfill in Winnipeg. And it's believed that there is at least one woman's body who is in that landfill. Many people are worried that there might be more and have been calling now consistently on the federal government to pay the money that it will take. Of course, it'll take money to do a search like this, to do the search. And Canada has been cool to those calls. Yeah,
and in a Truth and Reconciliation propagandists, as the government are, it's like, how can they justify such a thing given what they are willing to do for these billionaires who, I'm assuming their families could pay for this type of search on their own, and Canada has no reason to do that. And so again, if Canada's spending that sort of money and that's the floor, that is, of course, our money. That's public money. And I don't know, it just seems pretty friggin' disgusting, and just like another way that proves how, every single time we as average people call on something to be done or call on the government to do something, and they're like, there's no money, or we have to come up with a plan, or we have to research, or we have to blah, 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 whatever it is. And they never actually get to the point because it never actually ends up into the budget. It's just a decision that they're making to deprioritize something. And this is one of these times that is proven.
And I think it's really important too, because I saw people talking about this online. Like, Canada is signatory to international conventions on the law of the sea, where we engage in search and rescue missions when called on. And while the Titan submersible had nothing much to do with Canada, the launch ship is a Canadian ship. So there's also a Transportation Safety Board investigation that's on right now, because it's a ship flying under a Canadian flag. But this, Sandy, when I was reading this news at CTV last week, I was really thinking about what you were talking about last episode, where you were saying that the whole thing was done to look like a movie, right? Where it was like, ooh, these people are probably not alive. Oh, there's some hope. Oh, the oxygen's there. Oh, we can still save them. Canada launched the Aurora rescue aircraft the night of the day that it was pretty clear that they were dead. That morning was when the U.S. Navy reported some sort of sonic anomaly, which was probably the implosion of the Titanic searching submersible. But, okay, so fine, that night, Canada starts a search and rescue mission. Okay, maybe for 12 hours, maybe, but they continued for 3 days dropping these sonobuoys, trying to get evidence that there was some sort of missing submersible, even though all of the evidence certainly by the second day and absolutely by the third day was that this thing didn't exist anymore. So, Canada engaged in this international charade at the cost of $2.4 million. That's very, very low. It's likely closer to $3 million, because that's just the cost of the Aurora and how long it operated for. So, Christ, folks, we were played. Our money was just thrown to something to give people fake hope and to make people think that this was possible, and it never was possible. And all of the experts were saying at the time it wasn't possible. And we were like, fuck it, we're going to search for it anyway.
Yeah, it's terrible. And so now I think we should talk a little bit about what's going on in Ukraine as we are marking, 500 days of this war that's been going on. And in particular, there's this piece of news that I know that you want to discuss. It is the front of CBC News right now. It says new defense spending goals. This article talks about the NATO expectation that governments, that member states contribute 2% of defense spending to NATO. And I don't know. What do you think about that, Nora?
Well, do they say that this is like the same issue that has come up year over year over year over year, going way back to when Stephen Harper was prime minister? Because it is not news.
No, it definitely seems like it's a brand new issue. It is, like I said, the first thing, like if you go to CBC, it is Sunday night, it is July the 9th. If you go to CBC right now, CBC News, it's the number one news story. New defense spending goals.
Yeah. Okay. So every time NATO meets, NATO tries to get all of its member states to commit to spending 2% of its GDP on military. And every single time Canada's like, we're not going to do that. We can't do that. We don't want to do that. We don't have the capacity to do that. We're not doing that. And as I say, this goes back to under Harper. And I'm sure I even had this rant on this podcast probably twice because, we've been at it for a couple of years now. But journalists are always rehashing this like we've never heard of this 2% spending. Oh my God, Canada's letting down its NATO partners and Canada's not meeting its spending obligations and all this bullshit. And it's very clear that the media establishment is always working in favor of the arms industry, trying to get that 2% number hit. Now, in the article, Sandy, do they say we're actually going to finally do 2% of the spending, or are they just like, it's a call because NATO is meeting next week and this is a perennial issue?
I think it's the latter. It talks about in the article that that this is something that Canada agreed to try to do in the 2014 NATO summit, was to try to work towards 2%. It also says that currently Canada spends 1.29%. And then it says, which I'm sure you'll love this quote, that the Washington Post quoted leaked Pentagon documents last spring where Trudeau whispered that Canada is not planning on meeting the 2%.
Yes. And that got reported as, ooh, my gosh, Canada's in these new Washington Post papers, and it's Justin Trudeau being very secretive that we're not meeting it. We're not meeting the target. Like, at this point, it would be equivalent of throwing money at the armed forces and being like, well, just, why don't you guys all just triple your salaries? Because it's like, we don't have, like, they can't even purchase any of the aircraft they want to purchase. It takes forever to purchase any of the helicopters, any of the boats. Like, this is ridiculous. And it is all in the service of trying to tell Canadians that not only is this good, that NATO itself is good and that NATO's obligations are good, that it is good for Canada to be working towards 2% and we should be at 2%. But it is also important to tell us that we are engaged in war and our war contributions have to meet shoulder to shoulder with all the other nations alongside who we are at war with. Except we're not at war. Like, it's just so ridiculous. It's like, it feels like Canada's like in the schoolyard and Ukraine is getting its ass kicked by Russia. And Canada's like, yeah, we got your back. Yeah. And then Ukraine's like, oh, okay, really? And Canada's like, sure, we do. Keep going. Oh, you got kicked again. Oh, shit. Here, we'll send you a slingshot. Oh, you got kicked down again. Oh, no. It's just like, we're not actually there. We don't actually have skin in the game at all. Other than the drive of like the largest Ukrainian population outside of Ukraine in the world. And so this is just politics for the fucking Liberal Party. It's just politics for any political party. And it's really sick. It's really, really, really gross because at the end of the day, people are dying.
Yeah, at the end of the day, people are dying. And so I think that brings us just generally to what I had brought up before, but just like what the sort of public discussion has been on the war and what's going on right now. So if you have been seeing the news this week, you've probably seen that the U.S. has agreed to provide cluster munitions to Ukraine, and the cluster bombs, these types of bombs, have been banned in a lot of countries because of how awful they are and what they do to people. And I'm just reading this off of like Wikipedia right now to explain it. It's a form of explosive weapon that releases or ejects smaller submunitions. So it ejects other little bombs that are designed to, of course, carry forward and kill other people. And sometimes those other smaller bombs don't explode right away, which, of course, as you can imagine, poses a huge, huge danger to civilians, especially if you're fighting in areas that might be at some point civilian, that where civilians might be around or using later on after troops have left. And so, of course, this is a really big deal. This is really awful. I mean, the UN has policies against cluster munitions as well. The U.S. providing these types of weapons has, like the Biden providing them. It's been endorsed by top Republicans as well. So this is like something that will somewhat perhaps dictate how the Republicans, depending on who gets into power, if Biden doesn't win the election, if this war continues, like that the U.S. will probably continue to support this sort of thing. And so when this sort of thing is happening, when we're starting to, our side, like who Canada is supporting in the war, is starting to use these types of explosives that like are morally awful. Like what does that mean for our discourse on this issue?
Yeah, well, and not to mention, if you say anything that cluster munitions are bad and should not be sent to Ukraine online, you get a lot of people replying to you saying that you're pro-Putin, which I think is really fascinating. Like, let's think about the United States sending Ukraine cluster munitions. First of all, cluster munitions have been used by Russia from the start, and they've been used by Ukraine. There's been evidence of both. I'm really struggling to remember if I've written about this or if I talked about it on the podcast before, but I researched this and saw that, like, there are, as you say, Russia, United States, not signatories to conventions saying that they will not be used. But these are going to be left in Ukrainian territory. And as you say, they'll be left for a long time. And sometimes the munitions, like, they don't look necessarily like munitions and children touch them. And this is something that we know happens in other parts of the world where there is war. And so even if Ukraine is using them against Russia, it's still in Ukrainian territory. It's still going to hurt Ukrainians. Like I get that people are getting desperate at this point at Dave 500 and whatever. But to reach to these munitions, because the United States doesn't have the kind of munitions that Ukraine has asked for, this has been a way to say, oh, we don't have what you're looking for, but you know what, we'll send you cluster munitions. It's so bad. And it's such a long-term devastating munition and weapon that it's like, okay, okay, United States, is that a good idea? While at the same time, they're saying that they're going to send these things. We also just found out last week that the United States has been engaging in something called Track 2 or Track 1.5 diplomacy, where senior officials from the State Department and from other high-ranking officials in the United States have been secretly meeting with Russian officials to try and get to Putin to say, like, please stop this. What's it going to take to stop this? How can we come up with a diplomatic solution here that will end your invasion? And even then I saw people saying, like, well, that's just disgusting, because Ukraine has to be part of all of the discussions about what the terms will be of surrender, or what the terms will be of diplomacy or whatever. And it's like, yeah, the United States is meeting with Ukraine too, folks. Like, this is actually really good news that the United States still has back channels to Russia to try and convince them to stop their invasion. And I find it really weird and funny in a non-funny kind of way that people are turning that into Putin propaganda as well. So here we've got the United States that's like really engaged, as we all know, and trying to figure out like how their engagement goes forward as this thing drags on, as the death toll mounts. And we don't even know what it is, right? There's not really any good public numbers on what the death toll has been so far. And it seems like the only track for a certain kind of thinking is it's like all or nothing. We're fighting to save everything in Ukraine and we're willing to just die for it. And it's like, but there is deaths. Like this is not going to, that's just protracted war, which doesn't serve anybody.
No. And so for those of you who have seen this news, some of you may have seen that Canada did put out a statement confirming that it is against the use of cluster munitions and that it is compliant with the convention and takes seriously its obligation. But being critical of something like that, we should be thinking about how many billions of dollars our government has committed to this war and what that leads to in the end, like what it will obviously lead to. Like this is, Russia is a nuclear power. And if this is going to continue to go on the way that it's going on, it's going to mean death and destruction for many, many Ukrainians. And I mean, like, so if you come into this discourse thinking, gosh, like, the Ukrainian people deserve some sort of support, some reprieve, like this is disgusting, then I just don't see how people don't understand like the anti-war position being the only ethical position, because as we've said on this podcast several times before, and from the very beginning, if you want to understand like what the principled position is in a conflict like this, you think about the people and like what is going to happen to average people.
Or what is happening. I mean, this is the thing, right? Like we know that if Russia is entering this as scorched earth, as they want to make these territories as miserable and as destroyed as possible, you can't respond to that with more firepower because then you just give Russia what they want. Like, I mean, that's what happens here. And I think that one of the reasons for why it's so difficult to conceptualize these things is because we're not actually allowed to talk about them. There's very clearly been a refusal to allow any kind of critical conversations about what is happening in Ukraine. Of course, there are professors, academics that study this stuff that are able to talk more with more nuance and with more knowledge and be able of both the history and of the current situation of what the possibilities might be going forward. And there is still that, which is wonderful and important. But in mainstream media, like you really can't talk about an anti-war position at all. And I don't know if you saw this, Sandy, but like the Heritage Festival in Edmonton just canceled the Russian booth because they were receiving threats that if they went ahead to have the Russian booth in Multicultural Heritage Festival or whatever, that there would be violence. It's just like, this seems bad.
Oh, the Russian government runs the booth?
Yeah, Putin himself was supposed to be present.
Huh. Because that doesn't make sense. Did we not? I remember taking history in school. I remember it being mandatory. I remember learning many lessons. One of which was like about how the wars are generally not connected to like what like the people and who the people are. Like it's generally has something to do with like people in power and whatever class-based or geopolitical issue is happening there, and it doesn't have to do with who the people are and like and how people should respond to who people are as as their ethnicity. And that seems like, I don't know, is there no history classes in Edmonton? Is that what you're telling me? That's the conclusion I've come up with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, it's also just a period of time where the last 2 weeks, Dmitry Lascaris, he's been doing a national tour talking about what he thinks needs to happen to create peace in Ukraine, and a lot of people disagree with him, but a lot of his events have been canceled under threats of violence as well. So it's like, what the fuck? Like, yeah, okay, fine. You want to threaten people with violence? It's like, sure, we can do violence in Canada if that's how people want to police the ability of anybody to be critical of what's going on there. But like, let's be serious about that then. Let's be clear about what's happening. There's been a very weird push online to try and make the anti-war position on Ukraine be a position that is pro-genocide and pro-Putin and pro-war. It's so stupid when you say it like that, but that's what people are trying to do. I've seen a lot of people trying to argue that it is the fascist position is the anti-war position. Have you seen any of this, Sandy?
I have. I've seen it. I've seen it. I've scrolled past it. There's a lot of people, though, with blue check marks, too. So, you know, maybe that's saying something.
Well, you know what? I have been wondering how much of the blue checkmark world is actually connected to this coordinated thing called NAFO, which is a really beyond idiotic meme war, online meme war that has been like the way that a multilinguistic world can come together and support Ukraine. But
okay, so wait, you have to explain this one to me because I have seen this online, but it just seemed like some sort of like weird satire that I should just scroll past and ignore. Are you telling me this is worth understanding in some way?
It is very necessary to understand it because it has leaked into mainstream politics. And so last week, the president of Estonia made a video saying that she was so sad that she wasn't going to be able to get to NAFO's first in-person conference as an honorary fella. Everybody in NAFO is a fella, which is like red motherfucking flag. That's a red flag. Okay, folks, it's a red flag. It doesn't matter what NAFO is for. If they're all fellas, if you've been on the internet for more than fucking 5 years, you know that is a red flag. Anyway, but she's like, you know, I'm but you people have been the reason that the war is blah, blah, blah. Like, we need you. So it is the idea behind it.
Wait, I don't understand. Like, actual politicians are responding to this
Yes.
satire? I thought it was a joke. It is a joke. You just called them fellas.
Yeah. No, they call themselves fellas. And it's like, I literally want to punch every single person in the face in the world that calls himself a fella. Like in general, like before this was a thing. This is not an opinion I have because of NAFO. It's like fella, like what the fuck? Like you can say fellow, but fella. Anyway, so and they all have the dog. They all have doggo imagery, and it's like supposed to be cutesy. And as you say, lots and lots of them have blue check marks. And so I think that they're probably the first propaganda wing that has benefited the most from the new Twitter and from the policies of Elon Musk, which is also very interesting that I am sure that there are some academics out there studying. I hope. But I think what is so interesting about NAFO is, Sandy, if I was going to say to you, what kind of person founded this little movement? What kind of person would be the kind of person to found NAFO, calling themselves fellas and bonking people and coming after critics in the most annoying way possible? What do you think he espouses? What do you think he thinks about Jewish people? Let's say that.
Oh, yeah. I would say my guess on that anti-Semitism spectrum would be like highly off the charts. Yes.
Yeah.
That's where I would be.
Yeah, it's an American who has on social media praised Hitler and praised the Nazis and is a raging anti-Semite. So,
oh my God, wait. And so, sorry, like actual politicians are responding to this thing?
Well, because not everybody, it's very loose. So not everybody knows who the founder is or who the main guy was at some point. It's taken its own life. I think that if you surveyed like Canadians who were really into posting through NAFO, that they wouldn't necessarily know that the guy that started off was a raging piece of shit. But
no. Sorry.
I'm giving it to benefit of the doubt.
2023, in 2023 on the internet, you have to be better at propaganda. You may not understand it that way or call it that, but you need to be better at understanding like where things are coming from and how they were started and what purpose they serve, especially if you are a politician. So that's a huge benefit of the doubt there that you're giving, like that I know you probably don't agree with.
No, but I think it's really interesting because here we have one of the biggest Russian talking points was like their invasion was the denazification of Ukraine, which I think on, probably 7 or 10 different measures we can tell is complete bullshit, right? The totalitarianism of Russia and of Putin is, the ethno-nationalism of Putin, of his political project, all of these things I think we can look at and say, you are not invading Ukraine because of Nazism. Like, get the fuck out of here. That's bullshit. However, as we have said on this podcast before, there is still very strong fascist tendencies within, certainly the Ukrainian military. Of course, Ukraine's at war, so of course there's going to be a rise of extremist positions taken by certain people. Like that's normal, and that's not a Ukrainian specifically Ukrainian problem. That's going to happen anytime you have a conflict like this. But here we have also now, like, the entire posting thing goes back to this one guy who's like a fascist. It's like, this is just kind of just keeps happening. Like, why does this keep happening? This is so weird. And I'm going to suggest why it keeps happening, because what's happening in Ukraine is about global forces and power shifting. Every time you hear Chrystia Freeland or other people, I've seen a couple of other people make these comments, like high-ranking politicians make these comments. What's happening in Ukraine is they're seeing this as a fight against the West, against democracy, against the shining city on the hill, the way that I've literally heard Freeland say that twice in a speech, in 2 speeches before, and that this is an existential threat to the West as the American hegemony is collapsing, and we're seeing it collapse. And so, of course, you're going to have these really weird extremes in different tendencies all over the discussion and all over in the discourse. And as people are grasping to save what they consider to be Western democracy or Western civilization, like there's fascism woven deeply into all of that. So, of course, it's going to become exposed. Of course. And to shield themselves, then you have this really fucked up, communism and the Nazis are the same thing. And it's like, under no historical measure can you make that as a serious claim. These are not the same political tendencies at the fuck all, and in fact are the opposite ends of what people, like, of the political spectrum, all in the service of making the center, all in the service of making liberalism look enlightened and look like the right thing and worth dying for and worth refusing to cede anything to. And that, you know what? Yeah, it's like the casualties are horrible and the cluster munitions are horrible. And maybe we'll be at nuclear war, but this is just enough for us to go forward with this from the people in power. I mean, average people, of course, are not necessarily making the same decisions. And so I think that's where we have to keep our eye.
Who knows, Nora? Maybe soon we'll also start hearing that this is a just war, a war to perhaps end all wars.
Oh, my God.